Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are following breaking news for you this morning. Take a look at the markets this morning, taking a plunge as investors react to the sweeping tariffs the White House announced yesterday. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ were all down more than 3% at one point. Global markets are also taking a hit. Japan's Nikkei finished down almost 3%, and major indices in Europe are also down. The new tariffs impact almost all of America's biggest trading partners. The president says it's designed to level the playing field. Javier David joins me now. He is the business editor for the Dallas Morning News and a CBS News contributor. All right, so Javier, the president has acknowledged that there might be some short-term pain. I even saw the Treasury Secretary on CBS Mornings earlier today suggesting much the same. The question, of course, is how much pain are people prepared, and how long will that pain last?
Yeah, look, this is the end of the trade, the world trade as we know it, and investors do not feel fine. And then you know me, I can't resist a good gallows humor Gen X pun. But there's a staggering statistic from Bloomberg: 1.7 trillion with a T in market cap that's been erased from the S&P today with this opening. The truism is usually Main Street is separate from Wall Street, but consider this: 62% of the American public is invested in some way in the market, either through 401k or an account on an online trading account or so forth. So mainstream America is feeling this absolutely. And there's a little mystery to what's happening today. Like, look, for weeks, the market's been telegraphing exactly what it thinks about this tariff regime. The administration did what it did anyway. Even erstwhile allies are speaking out about the negative fallout. That includes former Vice President Mike Pence, who is calling this the largest peacetime tax in history.
So the market, as we just showed, the Dow is down, and it is going further. It is dipping, continues to go down. Walk us through the mechanics of what could trigger, for example, circuit breakers in the Dow.
Yeah, so circuit breakers, they used to happen fairly frequently when the indices were much lower, but the thresholds have been kind of raised. But there are three levels that we need to keep in mind. On the S&P, 7% is the level 1, 13% is level 2, and 20% is level 3, and that kind of varies based on the prior day's closing. They can be triggered when the market moves up as well as down, and the current system's been revised. So just the fact that we're even talking about this just kind of shows you how jumpy and volatile the mood is, and it bears repeating. Look, Wall Street's really worried about this future, and so is Main Street.
I watched the White House press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, earlier on another network suggesting that the president is looking out for small business owners, for farmers, for the middle class, and that this short-term pain is just a blip, and that at the end of this is a pot of gold / rainbow. But the question, of course, is if you hear, for example, Senator Tom Tillis say that there are farmers in his state that are just one crop short of a bankruptcy, I guess the question is, when we see the market dropping like this, when we see the effect that these tariffs are going to have, and when you see that big financial institutions are now suggesting that there's a 50% chance that the United States will see a recession, what could that potentially mean just globally?
Look, this is, the recession risk is not set in stone, but it's increasingly likely given how a couple of things. A, we have not defeated inflation, so we're talking a lot more about slowing growth and higher prices. And we need the consumer to continue to spend. So if these surcharges are passed along to the consumer, they function as a stealth tax. And JP Morgan sort of did this whole thing where they explained that A, it's going to shave off growth, and B, it's going to be sort of felt at the consumer level. And so these are things that we really have to keep in mind. It's not just an isolated thing where big companies are affected. It really is Main Street. It really is small businesses. And the mood of the consumer is very, very glum at this point.
We just threw up the numbers indicating which countries are going to see which tariffs levied at them. Have you, Javier, or have you seen any sort of concrete analysis of how the administration came up with these numbers?
There's been a lot of speculation, and they basically said it was based on the tariffs, but there was a great thread, and it's kind of complicated and a little bit difficult to get into right now. But there is a perception that the administration took, if basically divided what sort of this based on whether or not a country has a surplus running with the United States or a deficit. Did it in a really, really quickly, like back of the envelope way, and that it's basically overpriced.
I've seen that very similar analysis trending, and I wanted to know if you had seen it as well. And people are essentially saying if that is ultimately how it was done, that's absolutely bananas because that's not how you're supposed to do these things. We'll see how it all bears out over the course of the day. I'm sure we'll be checking in with you at 4 p.m. when the market closes. Javier, thank you very much, my friend.
Thanks a lot.
All right, let's get an international perspective now. Let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio, who's following developments for us outside of British Parliament this morning. So, Ramy, what are you hearing from MPs about these tariffs?
Sure, Vlad. Yeah, good to see you. But before we get into that, I'm just monitoring stocks here in Europe and in the UK. And off of the plunges that you were just talking about, the Dow down more than 1,000 points, we're seeing pretty much really a bloodbath here in Europe. The FTSE is down near lows of the day. The CAC 40 in France down 3%. The DAX in Germany is down more than 2%. These moves are massive, to say the least. I've also been looking at currencies, and currencies, when they move, talk about maybe 1/3% and 0.5% moves, but here the pound has risen by more than 1%. That is a massive move for a currency, Vlad. The euro is up by 2% against the dollar, even more massive here. So this volatility is showing that investors are reacting massively and negatively to these Trump so-called Liberation Day tariffs here. And this is also happening here in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting with British business leaders earlier today and warning that there will be an economic impact, which we are now seeing play out around the world, upending the global world order from post-World War II. He said his government will act with cool and calm heads. It's sort of a take on the keep calm and carry on mantra here, negotiating with Washington, the hopes of some kind of best deal, he says, for Britain. But as we look at the photos, the videos out of 10 Downing Street, I want to point out that the bosses of some of the biggest sectors here in the United Kingdom were with him in that room. The bosses of AstraZeneca, BAE, Jaguar Land Rover. This is important because they represent some of the top export sectors to the U.S. Pharma, aerospace, machinery, automobiles, easily $25 billion. A lot of that money could disappear, perhaps has disappeared in the past several hours of this kind of trading here. But while there's anxiety, Vlad, there's also perhaps a little bit of relief because the U.S.'s new tariffs on U.K. exports just 10%. And I have to caveat that by saying just 10% because we know it really could have been worse. It is worse with other countries, about 70 other countries by my count. For example, China, tariffs 34%, Vietnam even higher, 46%, Taiwan 32%. So this is a veritable, perhaps, bloodbath when it comes to the tariffs that countries around the world are now facing.
Yeah, and I've seen members of the Trump administration suggesting that these countries do nothing in retaliation, that they just sit back and take it. But Ramy, the word not just from 10 Downing Street, but also to the Elysee Palace, also to Bonn in Germany and in Asia, is that most world leaders are not going to sit back and take it. Right.
Well, people are trying to figure that out, right? Because I'm looking at it as sort of like a huddle time here in the UK, in the EU, and around the world. Leaders and business federations, trade unions, all just trying to figure out, listen, what the heck do we do now? Do we retaliate and then potentially incur the wrath of President Trump, potentially doubling down, tripling down, or more, if he were to say, you know what, if you're going to do it, we're going to do it right back? Or do they try to come to the negotiating table again? And we have been seeing that with EU leaders. For example, Ursula von der Leyen, she was talking about negotiations, but also with the idea that there is the potential for retaliation. She said earlier today from Uzbekistan that they do have a plan, but she is also talking very much about chaos. She used the word chaos in her remarks earlier. Let's take a listen.
All businesses, big and small, will suffer from day one. From greater uncertainty to the disruption of supply chains, to burdensome bureaucracy, the costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase. And what is more, there seems to be no order in the disorder, no clear path through the complexity and chaos that is being created as all U.S. trading partners are hit.
All home to something everyone can understand in von der Leyen's own words. She said millions of citizens will now face higher grocery bills, medication will cost more, transportation will cost more. In her words, she said inflation will go up. And in my words, that is not what Trump was elected to do. Vlad.
No order in the disorder. Ramy Inocencio for us outside of the UK Parliament. Thank you very much, Ramy. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, we're also hearing from members of the president's cabinet. Listen to what U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick had to say on CBS Mornings just a short time ago.
When tariffs come into place, foreign goods may become a little more expensive, but domestic goods do not. For the first time in your lives, you're going to actually think about the Americans who make the products, the Americans who produce these products and work in these factories. It's time for us to take care of them instead of taking care of the world. Our economic policy took care of the world, and look where it led us. It led us to a $36 trillion deficit, which our children and our grandchildren are going to have to pay.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is following all of this from the White House for us. Okay, Natalie, so Howard Lutnick suggesting that Americans will not see price increases when they buy goods that are produced in this country. But of course, almost everything that we buy in this country is produced outside of the United States, with the exception of a few brands and products. And of those, they're very expensive to begin with. So explain to us what the White House is saying about how these tariffs are actually going to work and how they'll be implemented.
Yeah, and Vlad, your point, that's why economists have been so worried, saying there's no question that Americans, everyday Americans, will see higher prices. But what the White House has said today, and we've seen, top officials, cabinet secretaries go on television this morning really standing by this strategy, saying that it is a long-term strategy. It's a matter of national and economic security to spur more production and manufacturing in the United States, as well as raise revenues, which has been a key argument. But a lot of questions remain about whether, the administration is open to negotiating with some of these countries. Before I talk more about that, let's start with where we are today. After yesterday's big announcement, there's a 10% baseline tariff on nearly all trading partners. And then on top of that, there's this reciprocal tariff on countries that impose duties on U.S. goods. And the president, the administration has said they calculated that roughly half of what those countries impose on the U.S. But we know that that is also a calculation based on trying to balance out the trade deficit with those countries. So some of the countries with the largest trade deficits are seeing a higher tariff rate. So at the top of the list, you have Vietnam with a 46% tariff. Then you have China with a 34% new tariff. But keep in mind, Vlad, that's on top of the 20% that had already been imposed earlier. So really, economists here are saying that everything from electronics produced in those countries to, clothing in India will face higher prices. Also, Taiwan, 32% tariff. That's a major manufacturer of semiconductors. So a lot remains to be seen about how much prices could rise. But keep in mind, these tariffs, the reciprocal ones, not set to take effect until April 9th. So Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, speaking on cable TV earlier this morning, said that the president could be open to negotiating potentially, that he's a deal maker. We tried to talk to her after that television hit. She walked past our cameras, but that's the big question is, could there be a flurry of last minute negotiations in the days before these new tariffs are set to take effect?
All right, Natalie Brand for us reporting from the White House this morning. Thank you, Natalie. So we're taking a look at the stock market right now. In just the last 14 minutes or so, it went from down about 3.33%. Now it is trending towards 3.25% down. Obviously, we're going to keep a look out on the market, not just the Dow, but also global markets as this all plays out over the course of the trading day. I'm sure we'll continue to see these gyrations up until the close this afternoon at 4 p.m. So stick with CBS News 24/7 for all the late breaking news on what is happening with the market. Meanwhile, let's get to some weather. The National Weather Service is warning of life-threatening flash floods today following reports of multiple tornadoes across the South and the Midwest. This video out of Arkansas shows what seems to be a pretty clear case of a twister touching down. No word yet on the damage from this particular incident, but at least one death has been reported as other states were pummeled over the last 24 hours. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is live in Lake City, Arkansas for us this morning. Omar, good to see you. There have been reports of asking folks in the area to brace for catastrophic flooding. What have you seen?
Well, almost on cue, Vlad, there's thunder that you may be able to hear behind us, and there's a line of clouds behind us. That's what we're kind of keeping an eye on right now. We're not expecting anything tornadic, but the National Weather Service this is their words. They say the rain over the next few days could be considered generational. But what the people are worried about right now is what's happening over my shoulder right now. A tornado did touch down here. You can see the roof of that building, of that home right there, ripped off. The walls peeled away. That red card that's right there, it used to be in the driveway, but the force of that storm pushed it off. So right now it's cleanup, but they're trying to do it in between rain spurts that are coming, and this rain is not going to stop for a few days.
So, I guess that question is, when you say it's not going to stop for a few days, how long can folks expect to be deluged with this?
Well, right now we're waiting to see exactly how much falls once it starts falling. We're standing under a tent right now because it's starting to come down a little bit. But the forecast says it could be raining into Friday and Saturday. Some places a little bit farther up could be 8 to 10 inches. That is a lot of rain coming in less than a week. So that they're expecting that, of course, that's going to hit the rivers and a lot of the creeks in this area. There's a lot of farmland around here. The word that's also going to flood some of the farmland in the area. People have been sandbagging, getting stuff ready, not for their farms, but for their homes to try to keep any water that may come up at bay. But it's hurry up and wait. But everybody is very well aware after the tornadoes that went through last night. Now they're looking up to the sky to see when it's going to start raining.
All right, Omar Villafranca reporting for us. Thank you very much, Omar. Appreciate it. The Trump administration is going to court today for the latest hearing over its use of a centuries-old wartime law to deport Venezuelans it claims are gang members. We're going to break down the contentious court battle next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Attorneys for the Justice Department will be busy today with hearings on several controversial issues. In one of the most contentious cases, U.S. District Court Judge James Boasberg is expected to determine if the Trump administration violated his orders not to deport Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act. The president has called for Boasberg to be impeached and has referred to him as a, quote, activist judge. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman joins me here in Studio 55. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
All right, so if this judge determines that the DOJ violated his orders, what are the consequences?
Vlad, so there's the potential for the judge to hold someone or the Justice Department in contempt. That could be civil contempt or criminal contempt. And this hearing today to show cause is a final step in that process. It's for the government to tell the judge why they did not violate his orders. But civil contempt could involve fines, it could involve possible imprisonment, or if the judge determines that there's a different remedy he wants to choose there. For criminal contempt, there would be an additional proceeding, and normally that's referred to the Justice Department itself. But if they didn't want to comply with that, if he decides to move forward, the judge does have the option of hiring private attorneys or appointing them as special prosecutors. So those are some of the options. But of course, first, the judge is going to make a determination about whether he thinks they did, in fact, violate his order knowingly.
So when we say that there could be consequences, there could be accountability, who are we signaling out? Like, I mean, the DOJ, is it the person who actually gave the order? Is it Stephen Miller? Is it Steve Bannon? Like who? Who's going to, who's going to, I'm trying to understand this.
Vlad, I think that this is the big question that's really up to the judge. He could say the lawyers, he could determine it was someone within the Justice Department, potentially someone with DHS, but we're really speculating at this point who he would think was responsible here.
Wow, fascinating. All right, there's also another hearing that's going to be held in the case of that Tufts University student who was basically abducted from the streets of Boston. What are we hearing about that?
So there's a hearing today in her case, and this is very similar to the Mahmoud Khalil case, the pro-Palestinian activist from Colombia, where the first question has become, is this case taking place in the right court? Because her lawyers are asking for her release. It's called a habeas petition. But what the government is saying is because she's currently detained in Louisiana, which is where they're sending a number of these students that they've arrested, that is the proper venue for this case. Louisiana is also within the Fifth Circuit. That's a very conservative court circuit. So this is likely why the government wants the case to take place there. What her attorneys say is it should either be in Massachusetts, where she was arrested, or in Vermont. And what's very similar here is that, like Mahmoud Khalil, she was moved multiple times after she was arrested. She was taken in Massachusetts, put in multiple detention centers in Vermont. But what her lawyers say is, one, they had no way of knowing where she was. They were not getting any information. So Massachusetts should be the right venue. She was with Massachusetts ICE officers for a lot of this time. But if not, it should be in Vermont. So that's really the first threshold here before other decisions can be made in this case.
Wow, fascinating. That's happening today, right?
That is happening this afternoon, yes.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, thank you very much, as always, my friend.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Vlad.
Okay, lawyers for the man the Trump administration mistakenly deported to El Salvador are responding to the government's admission. Abrego Garcia was detained and then put on a plane to El Salvador last month, despite his protected status in this country. In a new court filing, his lawyers slammed the government response and lack of action to return Abrego Garcia to the U.S. They say, in part, quote, defendants have already washed their hands of the plaintiff, of his U.S. citizen wife, of his autistic, nonverbal 5-year-old U.S. citizen child. The White House press secretary has called him a member of the MS-13 gang. Abrego Garcia's wife spoke exclusively to CBS News, telling us her husband is not a criminal. Several Republicans broke with their party to reject President Trump's tariffs on Canada. We're tracking the ongoing fallout. Next, you're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following this morning. Hungary has announced it will withdraw from the International Criminal Court this morning. The decision came just hours after the country welcomed the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for a visit, despite him facing an international arrest warrant. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban ignored obligations to act on the ICC warrant to arrest and transfer suspects to The Hague. Instead, he welcomed Netanyahu for a 4-day visit. If the withdrawal goes through, Hungary will be the only EU country not part of the court and the first to leave it. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is running for re-election, but this time as an independent. He made the announcement on X this morning saying he is still a Democrat, but there isn't a, quote, liberal or conservative way to fix New York. But there is a right way and a wrong way. This comes just one day after a federal judge dismissed the corruption charges against the mayor. The move sets the stage for a showdown between Adams and the winner of the Democratic primary. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is currently the frontrunner. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Brussels this morning for meetings with his NATO counterparts. You see him there meeting with the foreign ministers of Japan and South Korea. The allies are expected to discuss U.S. plans for NATO and Ukraine. But President Trump's relationship with Russia and his pushes to take over Greenland and Canada are also top of mind. Rubio will also face questions about the administration's new tariffs, so we'll be watching that. Meanwhile, we're continuing to monitor the street this morning as markets react to tariffs announced by the White House yesterday. All three major indices are down. You're looking right now at the Dow, which is down more than 3.5%. I want to bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, you and I have been talking all morning long about this, even before the open. So what is the message now for investors?
Yeah, I think investors are really worried about two specific things. It's how these tariffs are going to impact companies' profits, right? That's what they're always looking at every earnings season, because so many companies have a global supply chain and tariffs are going to raise costs for them. And then how is this going to impact the consumer? And I look at, across the board, all of the different sectors are down, but really you see this borne out in tech specifically. Because, where does my iPhone come from? Where do chips come from that power the AI industry. You know, we're talking Taiwan, we're talking China. And so investors are looking at all of these things, and they're seeing companies that may have to make decisions to bring manufacturing here or pay these high costs. That's going to impact profits. And then on the consumer side, you could see inflation go up when those companies pass on costs to consumers. And we talked about this, I want to say yesterday, Vlad, the biggest days on the markets this past quarter have been when we saw consumer sentiment go down. And because that is the worry that consumer sentiment is going to lead to less spending. So investors are sort of looking at all of these dynamics. I think the biggest fear is that this is going to slow economic growth when that all comes together.
So, Kelly, you no doubt saw the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on CBS Mornings today, and he made an interesting point suggesting that, yes, that prices will go up for goods that are manufactured outside of the United States, but this will encourage Americans to buy goods manufactured here in the United States. Of course, the question becomes, I sort of just did a random test of the stuff that I'm wearing and the stuff that I have, and almost nothing that I'm wearing, from the sneakers that I buy from Nike to my T-shirts, are made here in the U.S. The stuff that I do have that's made in the U.S. are generally heritage brands or things that cost a bit more money because they are manufactured here, because they pay the employees of those companies who manufacture those products living wages. And that's the reason why companies like Walmart, most of the stuff that you buy in Walmart, which is where most Americans shop, is made outside of the U.S. So can we realistically expect that Americans won't see high prices when they go shopping later this week?
Well, not in the short term. You are likely going to see higher prices in the short term, because even all of those products, yes, if you want to bring them here, that's going to take time and billions of dollars to create the factories and the capabilities to make all of those different products that you mentioned. So I think, I push back on what he says there. Undoubtedly, it's a good idea to have a domestic supply chain in the long run. But I also want to highlight there are products that we cannot make here. I mean, alcohol is one of them, right? You can't have tequila made in the U.S. You can't have champagne made in the U.S. Now, that may be champagne problems that I'm talking about there, but there are specific products that we simply just can't have made in the U.S. And so when you think about a tariff, that's never going to come off if it's not made in the U.S. and this is a long-term thing. You're going to have higher prices on those products.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Kelly O'Grady for us. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate you. Well, there were some exemptions made in the announcement yesterday, including Canada and Mexico, but they are still subject to tariffs of their own. Yesterday, Canada's prime minister vowed to fight them with some countermeasures and, quote, force. CBS News national correspondent Lana Zak is live now in Windsor, Canada this morning. So everyone is talking, Lana, about the impact these tariffs will have on the prices of cars, but you're hearing from experts who say the travel sector could be hit even harder. Why is that?
It's really interesting, Vlad. I spoke with a lot of people about boycotts. There certainly is a lot of anger here in Canada. And I thought that was likely the reason why border crossings are substantially down. And we're hearing from travel agents that Canadians just don't want to go to the United States. But when I interviewed Melanie Harding, she is a travel agent here in Canada, she told me that actually there's more to it than just that. Take a listen.
We will drive 4 hours to avoid the border. That's right. That's what we're hearing. It's the uncertainty of the trade war. It's the tariffs. Am I going to be stopped at the border? Am I going to be held up? Am I going to miss my flight? Am I going to be able to go back home once I get home? These are the actual things we're hearing right now.
So it's not merely that tariffs are impacting the price of goods, but fundamentally altering the United States' relationship with our closest dear friend, Canada, that has made people say that they are worried that if right across the border here, 40 minutes away, that's the closest airport in Detroit for the people here in Windsor. They're actually driving 4 hours because they're worried that they're not going to be able to cross that border easily, and that they might miss their flight and then might miss their vacations altogether. The idea that the border between the U.S. and Canada might be closed down, that's something that most people here wouldn't have ever contemplated. And it goes to just how much of a cultural issue this is beyond economics.
And have you heard anything about what these countermeasures that the prime minister talked about could look like, Lana?
Well, Prime Minister Carney's meeting with his cabinet today. As you said, he said he's not going to take it lying down, and that these tariffs that were announced fundamentally change the international trading system and that they will fight back. He has a lot of pressure, though, not to take this further and make it more escalatory, given that in that announcement yesterday, the 25% tariff on Canadian goods that was at least said was about migration and fentanyl at the border. That still stays, so there's no additional tariffs being put on Canada as of right now. That 25% auto tariff that went into effect overnight on foreign goods obviously will have major impacts on the auto industry. But we will wait and hear exactly what he has to say. But take a listen to this. The president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association said that avoiding additional tariffs yesterday was, quote, like dodging a bullet into the path of a train.
All right, Lana Zach, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And there was a move on Capitol Hill to block Canadian tariffs. Some Republican lawmakers broke ranks and joined Democrats in the effort. CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small is live on Capitol Hill. Torian, explain this vote for us.
Yeah, so Vlad, we saw happen last night. 4 Republicans, that's Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, and Rand Paul of Kentucky as well, decided to break the ranks in order to join Democrats in this resolution that would effectively end this national emergency declaration that President Donald Trump used to justify these tariffs against Canada. Rand Paul is really the surprising defector here, considering the other 3 are usual suspects when it comes to pushing back on Trump's agenda. Paul, though, is a free trade absolutist. He says that this would be devastating for the U.S. economy, which is why he ultimately decided to join his colleague in Mitch McConnell in voting against it. The question, though, is will this have teeth, considering they're staring down this resolution, the House of Representatives, which now has an even stronger majority in Republicans there, as 2 was sworn in yesterday from those special elections that happened in Florida, Vlad.
So how is this expected to land in the House, Torian?
Yeah, so Gregory Meeks, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is pushing forward with a resolution similar to the one that we saw happen in the Senate. The question, though, is can he scrounge up enough support from Republicans on the other side of the aisle to support this? Previously, we talked about this very fragile majority that Republicans had. It would only take 2 defectors then in order to push through or push back against President Trump's agenda. We saw that didn't happen time after time, especially the continuing resolution. Now, though, with 2 extra members in the Republican caucus, the threshold is even higher. We also know that Speaker Johnson is a skillful tactician when it comes to pushing through his will and the president's will. We saw recently a bipartisan effort for temporary proxy voting for new parents was ultimately quashed, even though there's still talks about whether or not this can move forward procedurally. But he's been maneuvering through these chamber rules in order to stop any efforts to stymie the president's legislative efforts here. We'll see whether or not Meeks will be successful in getting his resolution to the floor, and how many Republicans can go on record and say that they ultimately support these broad tariffs that the president is pushing.
All right, Torian Small for us on the Hill. Thank you, Torian. The first Atlantic hurricane forecast is out this morning. Officials from Colorado State are predicting above average activity again this year, thanks in large part to warmer sea temperatures. They predict there will be 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and that 4 of those will be above Category 3. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another first look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, and look, every single year we give you these numbers, the research entities and NOAA, they all put out their forecast, but we all know it only takes 1 hurricane to have a significant impact. That said, though, these numbers are for an active season. Like Vlad just said, 17 named storms. That's what's coming from Colorado State University for their prediction for the upcoming hurricane season. 9 hurricanes and 4 major hurricanes. You compare that to last year. Last year wasn't just an active year, but it was a devastating year in terms of the number of landfalls and major hurricanes. We had 5 major hurricanes in the Atlantic last year, 11 hurricanes and 18 named storms. Both the forecast and last year were above normal. Our average number of tropical or storms or named storms is 14, about 14.4, 7.2 hurricanes, and we typically see on average around 3 major hurricanes. So we're looking like we're going to see another active year. Whether those hurricanes or tropical storms make landfall, that's yet to be determined. But again, it only takes one system to have significant impacts. Hurricane season begins June 1st. The peak of the activity is on September 10th, and hurricane season runs all the way through the month of November. Today, though, our focus is on the midsection of the United States, where since Tuesday, we've seen over 354 tornado warnings. Last night, a very dangerous night with several long-track, very strong tornadoes, and that's going to continue as we go into the day today. We have 33.1 million people currently underneath the threat for flooding. Head over here with me. I want to show you the map here because it's a flood threat, but it's also that threat for severe storms. Once again, looking at the threat for tornadoes, very large hail, and of course, damaging winds as well. All of this is going to be associated with this storm system that is recharging as it moves across the midsection of the country up to the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and then once again regenerates across the southern plains up into the mid-Mississippi Valley. Vlad, the National Weather Service is using wording like life-threatening, life-altering, in terms of the flooding, not the tornado specifically, but the flooding alone. We could see 10 to 15 inches of rain across portions of Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky by the time we get through the weekend. Back to you.
Oh, boy, scary stuff. Thank you very much, Grant. Appreciate it. TikTok is once again up against the clock to find a U.S.-based owner or face a ban this weekend. We'll tell you who's making a last-minute bid. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Changes are coming to Washington's Reagan National Airport just months after that deadly mid-air collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and an American Airlines jet that killed 67 people. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve has more.
In the wake of January's deadly mid-air collision, several recent close calls, and just last week a fight in the tower at Washington's Reagan National Airport, the Federal Aviation Administration is making changes. The agency said it is increasing supervision and support for staff while reviewing arrival rates, which it says are disproportionately concentrated in the last 30 minutes of each hour.
They're trying to spread this out a little bit and lessen the workload on those air traffic controllers. They've got a very demanding job, and we need to make sure that we're looking out for their well-being as well as that of the flying public.
The NTSB is still investigating that mid-air collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and an American Airlines regional jet that killed 67 people.
That crash was horrific and it was preventable.
Senator Ted Cruz is demanding the Army release a memo detailing its limited use of a safety system that broadcasts an aircraft's position.
If another Black Hawk helicopter strikes another passenger jet and murders 67 people, because the Army refused to change its policy of turning off ADSB out, those deaths will be on the Army's hands.
A CBS News analysis of available FAA data over a 34-year stretch shows nearly 25% of reported near mid-air collisions involved at least one military aircraft, even though those flights make up only about 2% of miles flown each year. I'm Chris Van Cleve in Washington.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. There is a new deadline for TikTok to be sold or risk a nationwide ban. President Trump says the sale could be complete before the clock expires on Saturday. Earlier, CBS News Morning senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent confirmed Amazon could be that company taking over.
This is all about Amazon. CBS News can confirm that Amazon put in a bid for TikTok with the White House. Amazon and TikTok both declining to comment on this. But experts that we've been talking to say this could actually be a very natural fit if something like this is actually going to be considered by President Trump as he looks at all the bids across the board. The reason why, Amazon already has a lot of information about how you shop through Amazon Prime. They have a great amount of computing power and ability to possibly handle a TikTok user base when it comes to Amazon Web Services. We also know, of course, that Amazon owns companies like Ring, those doorbell surveillance cameras, and TikTok also gathering a lot of information on how you're enjoying enjoying that video that you're scrolling past or not enjoying it, and all of the user data that comes from the TikTok user experience. And so as we consider this, we know that there are some competing bids as well from Oracle and Blackstone. But, this April 5th deadline was essentially set by President Trump right when he got into office. He gave a 75-day extension to sell the app or face a ban. But President Trump seems to be very confident that a deal could be reached in time. He said tremendous interest is what has been generated from the business community, but certainly a lot of uncertainty right now when it comes to what the outcome will actually be.
TikTok's Chinese-owned parent company ByteDance has said repeatedly the app is not for sale. It has until April 5th to complete a sale before it is forced to shut down in the U.S. completely. We're keeping a close eye on a major storm system barreling across the country with potential life-threatening flooding. One last look at your forecast next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. If you're getting your tax tips from social media, the IRS is warning you to stop immediately. CBS News Philadelphia's Josh Zadorowicz reports.
Scroll through social media and you will find all kinds of tips to file your taxes. Some claim tapping into obscure credits can even net you bigger refunds, from writing off your car or even your pet to hiring your own kids. But tax professionals caution following some of it could lead to fines and delays getting any refund you're actually owed.
There's just enough truth to be dangerous.
There's usually some credibility in the claim, the credit, the deduction. It does exist, but not the way they phrase it, and certainly not with the way they're intending it.
The problem prevalent enough now, the IRS says it is stepping up reviews of returns that claim these other withholdings, saying instead of looking to ill-informed information on social media, speak to a trusted tax professional. More than 700,000 taxpayers at the end of last year were still waiting on their refunds that were frozen for review by the IRS after claiming credits they potentially weren't eligible for. The National Taxpayer Advocate's annual report to Congress in January partly blaming misinformation on social media. Jackson Hewitt Chief Tax Officer Mark Stieber says the biggest mistake people make is not claiming credits they do actually qualify for, like the earned income and the child tax credit.
Here's the thing that people don't really fully appreciate. If you leave off an income item, if you leave off your crypto, the IRS is generally looking for that and you might get a question. But if you leave off the earned income credit, which about 1 out of 5 do every year, or you leave off a deduction related to your self-employment, the IRS doesn't say, oh, wait a minute, they don't add back deductions. They don't add back credits. You don't get a bigger refund from the IRS. You leave it off, it stays off.
And a lot of people are leaving a lot of money on the table. The IRS said in just 1 year, eligible taxpayers left more than $7 billion unclaimed, and that was just for the earned income tax credit. This year's filing deadline is April 15th. I'm Josh Zadorowicz, CBS News, Philadelphia.
All right, let's stay in Philadelphia and bring back Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, and we're going to focus the attention back over the mid-Mississippi Valley today, where we've got that enhanced threat for tornadoes, large hail, 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and the threat for damaging winds. But the focus really over the next couple of days, while this is still a very real threat from those strong winds, tornadoes, and the damage from hail, but now we're really going to throw in an additional threat, and that's going to be the heavy rainfall that isn't just today, but it will last through most of the weekend. Multiple rounds of very heavy rainfall could amount to 10 to 15 inches of rainfall. That will definitely result in some life-threatening flash flooding. So a big concern there for portions of Arkansas, West Tennessee, and Kentucky, Vlad, as we head through the weekend. People need to stay weather aware and make sure they have ways to get those weather alerts. Back to you.
Advice. Thank you, Grant. That does it for me, folks. We're going to keep a close eye on the stock market, down about 3.5% right now as we speak. Stocks plunging this morning in response to President Trump's sweeping tariffs. After the break, Mugo Adiwe will take you through all the breaking news coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.